Welcome to the webinar, everybody. We really appreciate all of you taking some time here after lunch on, at least in the Northeast, what is proving to be a very cold and blustery winter storm day. And we're going to talk a little bit about the prevention paradox, and we'll get right into this topic. But before we do, I want to introduce my co-panelists with me. Tyler Smith from Dark Rhino joins us. Tyler, do you want to give a little bit of your background real quick?
Sure. So I am a military veteran, served in the Marine Corps. I was an infantryman and got into technology, started working at Apple, and worked in security as an analyst for a while, and then started doing consulting, and then started Dark Rhino Security after doing that for several years. So that's my background in a nutshell.
Chris Garrett's, I think
Yeah.
there's a little bit of overlap there other than the Apple part, but please go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. We didn't run into each other in the military, but I did spend 10 years with the Air Force. So did everything from system administration when I was younger to leading the incident response team and the hunt team at the Air Force CERT for a while. Founded Infosight with a couple of those folks back in 2014. And right now we just basically focus on incident response and hunting for our partners and our customers.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, Chris. Appreciate it. So let's give everybody in the audience just a very quick 30-second intro to both of our respective companies. And I'll just, on the Dark Rhino side, Dark Rhino is a purpose-built cybersecurity consultancy and managed services provider. That is all we do. We don't do IT infrastructure. We don't do any other ancillary services. We're purely dedicated to cybersecurity, and our difference is in the value innovation that we bring to our offerings so that companies of all sizes can be enabled with leading cybersecurity protection. We have a pretty comprehensive portfolio that covers most of the critical elements of the SANS sliding scale, which we'll talk about here in a second. But Garrett, if you want to just quickly introduce Infosight, that'd be great.
Yeah, Infosight's we're a Texas headquartered company, but we are a product vendor. We build technology and a tool set, a platform to be able to hunt and to do incident response. So, there's other detection vendors out there in the world, but Infosight really focuses on that advanced hunting use case and that advanced incident response and investigation use case. So we arm partners like Dark Rhino to be able to do that kind of work.
Fantastic. Well, then with that, let's dive into this a little bit. And I think it would be really good for all the attendees if we could set a little bit of context. And just one quick note before we get into the nitty gritty of this presentation is that everyone hang around till the end. It is the holiday season, and there is a wine raffle at the end to bring a little joy in these times. So I would ask you folks to hang out because you got to be present to win it. But now with that out of the way, let's get into this. In terms of setting context, I think a lot of folks may be familiar with the SANS sliding scale of cybersecurity, right? And basically the ideation behind this is that you should consider making your investments from left to right on this, right? And we see a lot of folks follow this, but that is not necessarily always the best thing to do, and it is not necessarily what needs to be done today. Because of a lot of advances in the way proactive monitoring, threat hunting, and cyber intel, which are later parts of this scale, have evolved. Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the general gist of this entire webinar is about how organizations view their maturity in this. So, every organization is going to be a different level of maturity, whether they're just have antivirus and a firewall at the very left end of it, and they're figuring out patching, to they have an advanced SOC and they're trying to augment and figure out what else they're missing in their environment. And so regardless of what that is, the intention here is to take what the common knowledge of this kind of material from SANS and from NIST, and then think about it in a different way. And so we're gonna think about it with this paradoxical thing we call the prevention paradox that really changes how we think about this particular scale.
I couldn't have said any better. Tyler, do you have any thing you want to add to this?
No, I mean, that pretty much nailed it. It's like anything else that's out there. It's a good guide for people trying to get a handle on security. You don't have to. It's not a rule, just a guide that helps people understand where their money is best invested. And we're going to kind of use this, like Chris said, to talk about the problems that can arise from focusing solely on these kinds of things.
So with that, a lot of cybersecurity revolves around prevention, detection, and response, right? I mean, those are three pillars of cybersecurity, and the NIST framework has an extensive focus on all three. But Chris, if you want to jump in here and talk a little bit about the framework and how it relates.
I think we talk about 5 functions of cybersecurity operations when we approach NIST. Everything from identifying the assets you need to protect, to protecting them, and just responding when things go wrong. And that really boils down to 2 different efforts that folks make. That first effort is really figuring out what you want to defend and defend it. Stop the attackers from ever getting in. Prevent them from ever getting in. Put your walls up. Put your technical controls in place, and protect those assets. That's kind of like number 1. Number 2 is when, in the case of failure, detect and respond to any incident that occurs. So if someone does get in, if data is lost, whether that's maliciously or some insider thing like that, we need to be able to detect that failure and then respond to it and recover quickly. And so this 5 really boils down to protect the assets, and if you can't protect them, detect the failure and respond to it.
And do you think, Chris, there is maybe a little bit of an overemphasis on the prevention side? At least, anecdotally, I personally see that, but what's your experience with it? I'd like to get Tyler's view on that too.
Yeah, from my perspective, obviously, we focus on hunting and incident response, and those are failure cases, through and through. So our job is to detect the failure cases and respond to them quickly. That's what we do day to day. We find that most organizations are completely ill-prepared to do that. And so they don't have investments in the ability to respond. They generally have a retainer with someone to go in and do an incident response engagement. It ends up being very, very costly and a lot of times late. And so, we find that most investments are in technical controls, build the wall, build the moat, and walk away.
Yep. I agree with what Chris said. It's easier to build that stuff because it's a known. I need a firewall. I need AV or EDR tools on my endpoints. I need a SIM. These are all known factors. And the problem is they only get you so far. And as soon as someone introduces something that walks past all of those, that's where you run into issues. Especially if you're like the drunk guy looking for his keys under the street light, because that's where the light's at. And, you're never going to find it there. It's already gone through your defenses, and it's doing whatever it's doing. But that's the whole point of this webinar. So
yeah, well, it kind of brings up this pyramid of pain, which some folks may be familiar with. You have, at the base level, things like hash values and IP addresses, things known knowns that we all know how very well to automate, address, and deal with in a very repetitious fashion. But as you move up this continuum, it gets exceedingly difficult to automate. And at the very top, you very much need that human intervention. It leaves the domain of the vendor, if you will, and really becomes a thing of human intelligence to deal with some of these TTPs that are out there. But Chris, you made a comment on the last slide, about, I guess it alluded to that it's a very reactive process that a lot of companies face, where there is an incident and then they're reacting to it. And I think part of this is to shift and turn that around and look at a very proactive response, proactive hunting, proactive detection, and really not reveal our own TTPs to those bad guys. Any thoughts on that you might want to share?
Yeah, I think, for the pyramid of pain, it really has two perspectives. One is, how hard is it to do these things for a defender? The sophistication of the defender is going to go up when they're going up the pyramid of pain. It's going to be harder. It's going to require higher skill sets. A lot of people have to make choices about the investments they make there. Can they afford a full-time hunter? Can they afford a full-time monitor that has the skill set to do the top things? Oftentimes not. And I like Dark Rhino's approach when it comes to this kinds of stuff, is because you can, not everyone is looking for a SOC full of people who can do the tip of this thing all the time, 24/7. That's what some people offer, and they charge for that. In other cases, not everyone needs that 24/7. Some people need that a risk-based approach, which you guys have, on how to apply the harder things and how often, and is that effective to do. And what we found, and what Dark Rhino is doing, that is effective at a lower cost.
And, Chris, we'll talk a little bit more about that towards the end of this presentation, on how what we are presenting here with the prevention paradox and addressing it really can be done by a company of any size, and even with limited resources and budgets, so that they are far more secure than what traditional techniques might offer them. So with that, let's dive into this thing that is the prevention paradox. And give us a little history on this. This was actually something that came out of the U.S. Air Force, right?
It is, yeah. It wasn't it's not well documented outside the Air Force. I haven't seen very much of it. A lot of people nod their head whenever I talk about it, and they didn't realize it had a name. So it's never been presented at anything. But I first heard this in 2011 from a friend of mine who's still in and doing crazy stuff. But they haven't brought it outside the military because they stayed in the military. And so I started talking about it, and I blogged about it a few times, and people really found it super interesting. So that's why we're here, is the fact that this exists. There's this idea that as we make our investments in prevention more and more and more, we do get more secure because we've increased our prevention. But if anything defeats our prevention, we can't see that. And so the prevention paradox is this interesting case in 2011 when we were looking at what we were doing with our investments, because we had a layer of prevention, and we had a layer of detection, and we had a layer of response and hunting for getting to those unknowns. You can prevent what you can see and you are confident in. When you're less confident, you can monitor passively. And then when you don't know anything that's in there, you got to proactively go look for it. And so what ends up happening is, as you increase your prevention to where you're saying, hey, if I can detect it, why don't we just automatically stop it? There's this idea, there's this problem that occurs. And what we found was, we took all of our detection signatures that we could make confident, and we turned them into an auto block mode. And we lost visibility. And so there was this paradox where we did increase our prevention capability, but we actually lost visibility on everything that was going to get through in that case. And so this was a study done to show that if you do try to prevent every attack that attacks you, yeah, you're going to have a lot of stuff stopped. But when it does fail, that failure case, you will have no idea unless you are proactively hunting, someone's looking at your network. And so we basically reduced our monitoring, reduced our effort in all those other cases, because we felt like we were more automated. We were stopping everything automatically. What do we need to do else? But we ended up being less secure. And that was the prevention paradox. It was like, we increased our prevention and we made ourselves less secure. We became more blind. And that's what this idea is. And the reality is because the attacker, well, the reason we found is because the attacker is knocking on our door, knocking on our defenses, and getting feedback from that. And they're going to keep trying stuff and go up that ladder, that pyramid of pain, until they find something that's more sophisticated than our prevention, and they're going to get in. And when they get in, they get to stay in there.
And is that, Chris, Tyler, a reason why we see dwell times in environments be so large, 200 plus days on average, depending on what industry magazine you're reading, but it's generally 200 plus days?
Yeah, I think that contributes to it heavily, and a lot of the other part of this is the human element, the way that they get used to the security controls that they have, and they get to trust them, and it's like a security blanket almost. It's not really protecting them from anything that they are going to be hurt by beyond a certain point. There is a lack of protection, and that's, I mean, if you're confident that your prevention methods are stopping everything, then why would you be looking for, compromise?
So the more you prevent, there's a chance that there's a degree of less safe you become.
Yeah, if you don't know where the edges of that prevention begin, and you're not looking beyond those, then yeah.
So let's talk about this then, Chris. The role of detection and response. What do you see?
When we see this, is like there should be a distribution of resources when it comes to this, and most organizations can't afford a full-time SOC, and that's why they go to folks like Dark Rhino, because you guys can provide a cost-effective way of doing this. But the first case, all secure organizations are going to devote time to prevention and to stopping the attacks from ever occurring in the first place. That's important. They're also going to layer on monitoring of their network to make sure they're seeing any of the failure cases. When our prevention controls don't stop the attack, can we see it and stop it quickly? That detection and response. And that's really where the managed detection and response market came from, is because of this need to layer on that detection and that hunting to find the things that get through the defenses and the things that might be still lurking in there, those unknowns. And so if you have those layers, you're able to, as the attacker iterates against you, a lot of them are going to give up because your defenses are great and your prevention stopped them. Some of them won't. And they're just going to keep trying and try something different until they get in. And hopefully, if they get in, you have a layer of monitoring and you are able to respond to it so that you can stop them, even if they are able to get through.
And I think, one thing I want to add in on that is for that persistent attacker that is trying to get in. I think one thing that all organizations inherently must do is really truly look at risk to their critical assets, the things that not, when I say assets, just not the computers, but we're talking about, the data. What is that critical data that someone really wants that can be monetized? Because by and large, most of these attacks, unless they're led by a nation state, are monetarily driven. And it's very, very critical that organizations look at that risk and understand it, so that when this is being deployed, even when we're looking at monitoring or we're looking at proactive threat hunting, we are really, you're always looking for that proverbial needle in a haystack, but you're really focused on which haystacks you're looking at, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and let's talk a little bit about this prevention versus detection and response, right? So,
Yeah,
Chris,
the common wisdom is always an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. I think that's common wisdom. Everyone kind of like is taught that and knows that, and I feel like it is definitely true in most cases. You do need to have that. You need to have some kind of prevention layer. But a lot of folks in the cybersecurity industry, what we found is they're investing in prevention before they invest in anything else. And so what ends up happening is you got, to use an analogy that I've told before, is I've heard folks say, I can't afford hunting and I can't afford MDR. I can't afford to monitor my network. And what was the point of monitoring my network if I don't even have a fully functioning defense in place to stop the attacks in the first place? It's just going to be playing a whack-a-mole. That's the common wisdom I keep hearing. But if you put that analogy in the physical space, it doesn't work. I can't hire a security guard until my fence is completely surrounding my organization. No. The reason you have a security guard is because your fence isn't complete. Something is going to get through. And so you don't wait to hire that security guard because your entire fence isn't perfect or your fence isn't tall enough. Like, most organizations don't have a perfect defense, and they still need to monitor their network. In fact, they're probably more important to monitor and have hunting, services given to them, because they can't stop everything.
Which is a little backwards from where the SANS scale might guide you to go initially,
Mm-hmm.
but technology has changed, services have changed, so this is now a tractable scenario for most organizations. We'd urge them to take
Mm-hmm.
a look at it, right? So let's introduce in our what may be a potential solution here. So when we look at the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain, which I'm sure everyone here is very, very familiar with, right? We're talking about addressing everything post weaponization, right? And what we have put together as a potential solution here is what we're terming, at Dark Rhino, we term it IPINR. We intentionally chose not to use the words MDR because we really, MDR is a very reactive thing. Response means that something has happened. So what we're saying is that we're going to go into a very, very proactive mode, and we're going to do it on an analytics basis so we can evaluate several hypotheses rapidly and not go through them one by one by one. So for us, IPINR, it's really, incident prevention, incident identification, and then finally response. And the Infosight tools, Chris, and the technology that you have co-founded is critical to this for us and as an enabling factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is there anything that you would like the audience to know on any Infosight capabilities here, or should we go on?
It's interesting, the SolarWinds breach that happened, or the vulnerability that's out there with that backdoor that everyone's dealing with right now. Some people ask, why didn't we detect this? If it's been in place for 6 months, if it was delivered by SolarWinds. And just a story here, and this is why you need eyeballs on, why you need someone like Dark Rhino with the skill set and the tooling to be able to go do proactive looks and to monitor for activity that wouldn't normally flag on your prevention stuff, is cases just like this. And so on one hand, every antivirus in the world labels some SolarWinds tools as malware. They have a tool called Dameware that they distribute. It flags on everyone's anti-malware. And if you call them and you verify this is indeed Dameware from SolarWinds, they will tell you to whitelist on that on your AV. So even though it's detected as malware, we whitelist it because we need to use that tool. And it looks like malware. Dameware is a remote access tool. And so there's no way to not detect it as malware. It's doing what malware does. But people want to do that, and it's authorized. So we authorize it. And so if you get this tool and it's flagging, a lot of people are going to look at that and say, is this from a vendor? If it is, whitelist it, and because it's false positive. And that wasn't the case in this case. But that's why no one really detected it until someone really started looking at the behavior of these apps. And then number two, now that we do know about the vulnerability, there are 30,000 organizations that have this software. How many of them actually got compromised and got stolen stuff from? How fast can an organization go and search for that and see which systems are affected? It turns out like not very well. We've had a lot of folks talk to us about, hey, we published an extension for our product because we can detect that Orion's installed natively, and we can detect the use of things like Cobalt Strike natively in memory, and we're going to monitor that. And Dark Rhino's team's going to know about those things. But in the case of this very specific things that could have been whitelisted because it's a vendor product, you got to go look for that manually. And we ended up publishing an extension to go look for that activity in particular on top of the normal hunting we do, which is very, very broad. And so when you're doing hunting that's very specific, that's where you really need the expertise of a team like this to do that. And I believe that your IPINR service offers that to your customers.
Yeah, and Chris, I would like you to just briefly touch base on something you and I had sidebar with, and that is the whole analytics-based versus the hypothesis-based.
Yeah, this is something that when you go to Black Hat and you go to these talks and you hear people publishing on hunting, a lot of times it is people who have a large SOC and a large set of data, and they're approaching threat hunting from a perspective of, I have a hypothesis based on the attackers that we're seeing or that are targeting us. I'm going to go look for that particular activity because we might have it. We're being targeted by this organization that uses this one very specific tool or happens to attack SolarWinds. So I'm going to use that hypothesis to go look at my SolarWinds boxes or look for that very specific tool. And so that hypothesis-based hunting is a very advanced technique. It is the one most talked about when it comes to techniques, and it requires a significant amount of maturity to even do. Infosight particularly does not, we don't play in the top 100 Fortune 100 companies that have the resources to do that. So our approach to hunting is very different than a hypothesis-based, which requires existing maturity. Ours is a very broad approach that says, I don't trust anything on your network that's going to try to detect this stuff. I'm going to go look for it. We're going to do a very broad stroke. We're going to uncover every rock. And then when we want to go on specifics like this SolarWinds thing, we can add an extension and go look for that particular activity once we've covered our other bases. And so the approach that we take, is that broad look. What are all the MITRE techniques, all the different techniques that could possibly be there? Look at every process that's activated, and verify that that's not known malware as a first brush, and then look for those TTPs as a next brush. And then we can look for specific activity based off a hypothesis, like I might have SolarWinds breaches. That's the approach that we take, and the one that we recommend and train for our partners like Rhino.
So, Chris, let's get into a case study here. And Tyler, I'd like you to add your own commentary here because you've spent quite a bit of time in healthcare with some pretty large systems. But so, Chris, do you want to talk a little bit about this case study, and then Tyler, please jump in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. This is just a case study. I was heavily involved in it, so I got a chance to look at it and review the data. But it was interesting because this is a case where the prevention paradox really demonstrated itself. Is you got this hospital, 7,000 employees, very common size organization that we deal with. They don't have a heavy SOC. They rely on outsourced monitoring. They rely on outsourced tools. And so they had plenty of prevention capabilities, which was where most of their investments went into: app control, Defender, endpoint security, all these products. And those things do well for 99% of the attacks. But in this case, we had the unknown get through there. Didn't trip any monitoring alarms, didn't trip anything. It just went into the unknown ether because it got in. And the only way that they knew anything was going on was app control said, something tried to execute out of the temp folder, and you have a policy against temp folder activations. So we stopped it. That didn't say it was malware or anything. Now you have to figure out, like, what did that? Why did that happen? And you're trying to bring in all the folks. We finally, they brought the partner in with Infosight. We looked at it and said, hey, you guys weren't aware of this, but you have an actor that got it, and you have 3 key servers that have Cobalt Strike on it that are actively staging a second ransomware attempt. In fact, the thing that got caught from executing out of the temp folder was a ransomware attempt on every system you have in your entire network. And you didn't know about it until app control said something tried to execute out of the temp folder. You got lucky that you had some kind of detection thing to detect things like that. It wasn't really meant to do that, but it did. It tripped it. But these guys are still in there. They had 3 key servers, and they were actively staging a second attempt because they got the feedback that you don't allow executions out of a temp folder. So I'm going to do it out of a different folder where you do allow it. And so that's what they were trying to do. Luckily, we caught it in time. We were able to cut off their access. We were able to destroy that malware and get rid of the Cobalt Strike on those servers. And it really purged that actor. And so that's really where managed detection and response and the type of service that you guys are offering comes into play. Is if it's a good service that's able to go and do this, proactively hunt for this stuff. I mean, they were in there for 4 days and had two execution attempts on ransomware. That's enough time to find them, especially even if you're doing a risk-based approach where it's not 24/7. It is risk-based. You're still going to find actors like that, especially if you got a little indicator like, hey, something weird happened.
Mm-hmm.
And Tyler, your experience?
So, kind of tying back to the prevention paradox, when I was working in healthcare, and I would find little threads, little indicators that something wrong, had happened, and I'd start to go down, try to unravel things, and more often than not, I would hit at least one person would be like, "That's fine. It's just this thing. It always does it." And most of the stuff that I found had been marked false positive in our SIM environment by another analyst, and you know, I I would follow it to the very end and realize, okay, so I have 3 machines that are doing, this list of bad stuff, and I would send a ticket out and say, please somebody go get these off the network, re-image these machines, and the technicians, the first time I did it, the technicians were like, oh yeah, it's fine, and I go back and look at it, and they updated the ticket with ran malware bytes, uh, removed like several things, and on this one instance they removed some drivers that were actually critical to making the system work, which is a godsend because it stopped working. So but they put it back into service because in their minds they ran malware bytes, it found some stuff, they removed it, they don't have to re-image the machine. And it was one of those things where at the time we did not have the bandwidth to really dig into these things. So when I found something and it didn't look right, I would just say delete that machine and re-image it with a fresh image. I'm not
Okay.
even gonna try and play this game of I'm smarter than whoever's attacking us and I'm gonna figure out what they did. I didn't have time. It was like, almost 30,000 employees across 12 hospitals and over 200 care sites. So I was just like, go get it, delete it, re-image it, put it back into service. And what was 3 machines less than 12 hours later was 36 machines. And again, it was because that prevention paradox. Like, well, I ran this tool that I have, and it said it got rid of stuff, so we should be okay. Um, but thankfully, he deleted a driver that enabled remote folder access. Somehow I can't remember exactly what it was, but it really prevented the real bad stuff from happening on accident. So,
That's a lot of re-imaging,
oh
Tyler.
yeah,
And I
yeah, yeah.
think with the technology today, maybe some of that work could have been shortened, and we'll talk about that here in just a
Hmm.
second, is the
Yep.
rapid isolation capabilities that are there. And it it goes to both how the technology and the service are layered together to make this thing work. In fact, it's a great segue. By the way, folks, if you have any questions, feel free to type in the chat and ask those questions, and we'll try and get to them at the end of this discussion. But going on, in talking about time and efficiency, I think it would be prudent to talk a little bit about the architecture, first from a technology aspect, and then we'll talk about the layered in service aspect of it and how we're leveraging Six Sigma as part of this response cycle. So, Chris, could you just briefly
Yeah.
describe the Infosight cloud and the architecture here, please?
Yeah, and of course, this is only one aspect of what Dark Rhino uses, but it's a significant part of the incident response and managed hunting. For Infosight, we are a cloud-based solution. We gather the intel. The type of organizations that we deal with, are comfortable with that, because it is the most effective way, is getting in cloud-based threat intel up to date as possible. Not on-prem where it could be attacked in the compromised environment. What we do have on-prem is either agents on those boxes monitoring those systems. We have the ability to deploy in a monitor mode like any other EDR, in addition to our memory analysis, which is proprietary and differentiated. We also have agentless methods where we can hunt in an organization. Sometimes people just say, hey, you know what, I don't have the money, I don't have the time. We're not going to engage in a full 100% monitoring thing right now yet. You also have the ability to perform assessments where you can go in on a temporary basis, and using that Six Sigma approach of a risk-based approach, to say, what if we just looked at your environment periodically, look for these indicators in case you have one of those threats that happens to last for 6 months, which is way too common. Then just do that periodically. And so we have that agentless capability where incident responders can just parachute in, or hunters can go parachute in, deploy, look, and then go on to the next problem. We're expanding that platform, of course. Our latest stuff still in a beta kind of fashion as we are moving. Every endpoint vendor has to make a choice right now is how do you expand beyond just the endpoints, because people are getting hacked in the cloud, people are getting hacked everywhere else. Infosight's moving into the SaaS territory where we're monitoring things like being able to do detection, hunting, and response on Office 365 and AWS management layers. And so those SaaS services are being hacked almost as much as endpoints from email now. And so that's where we're moving in, and that's a capability that we'll be offering and working with Dark Rhino on here shortly.
And there's an extensive analysis capability here as well. You want to explain a little bit about that, Chris?
Like we talked about hypothesis-based hunting, you're only doing you're looking for one thing. When you approach it from an Infosight perspective is, I need to look at everything. If I look at everything in your environment and it goes through our analysis pipeline and says, do I know about this thing? Is it known good, known bad? Yes or no? Deal with it if it is. Then it goes through things like rules. Is this behavior a known bad behavior, like a MITRE rule? Yes or no? And then if we still have a need for going deeper, we can do those heavier things that you wouldn't normally do to everything in the environment. You can detonate them, you can sandbox them, you can do all that stuff. The platform handles all this, and from a right click, some of it's automated, some of it just right click, I need to go deeper. And so this analytics pipeline really feeds into conclusions that says, even if one AV says it's bad or these guys say it's good, we're still going to verify with multiple vendors and multiple threat intel sources, is that accurate? So that, even if my solution, like that Malwarebytes says it was good, I can count a million times, and Tyler, you've seen the same thing. Malwarebytes may say it's good, another says it's bad. Which one's right? You got to make a determination. And that happens all the time. And it's not just Malwarebytes. It's like every vendor has a different set of things they detect. And so, it's hard to say who's the best and just use that. It's really about using the entire community.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I want to talk a little bit, you've described very well what from the technology aspect. When we get into the actual service of what IPyNR is, where Infosight is the enabling element for us, we have taken a very different approach. So it's a very proactive approach. So the first thing we did, when we looked at looking at efficiency, quality, fidelity of data, and cost, which are all completely intertwined. We looked at taking the Six Sigma process and layering it on top of the incident response lifecycle. So some of you might be familiar with the DMAIC, the design, measure, analyze, improve, and control. And we said, we're going to layer this on top of what a traditional threat hunting world looks like. And by doing so, we're going to take some of the elements that came out of statistical sampling and of baselining to increase the security of the environment. So let me give you some concrete examples here. So what we would do in the very beginning of working with a client is first baseline the entire environment. And the enabling technology that's underneath allows us to do this pretty rapidly, but it's critical that we establish a very good baseline. I don't think that needs a lot of explanation. Once we've baselined, we really also would want to establish what the critical assets are and put that 24/7 monitoring on the critical assets. So you got a great baseline, you've got 24/7 looking out on the critical elements of the organization. But then you look at the rest of the endpoints where you do get malware, ransomware starts there, or people are in those environments for a long time. There, to at the same time have a great quality of data, but also help with the cost, we're going to say we're going to sample that environment 25% of the time on a quarter-on-quarter basis across subnets randomly, which is very much a Six Sigma technique. And if we're pulling those samples 25% of the time, 25% of the assets at the endpoints Then over the course of a year, we've looked at the entire environment. And given the fact that the dwell time is 200 plus days, it stands to reason with our proactive hunting, we should be able to find many of those APTs. You can never say we'll find everything, nobody can, but we should find a significant portion. But what this does is that it has a tremendous impact on speed and resource use, which directly correlates to the cost, and it actually brings the technology down, or I shouldn't say the technology, the service of IPINR down to a level where anyone on Main Street can afford it. And as an ideation, it's or as an example, it's fractional to what you folks might be in cost, what some of our competitors in the space may be um, putting out there. So would love to answer questions on this, but that's a little bit about the IPINR service, and we would really love to talk to you folks in more detail than what in the time that we have here today to go into the nitty gritty of it, if you will, right?